big news, the biggest NBA news today we have is that Bradley Beal is going to the Phoenix Suns. It had been reported over the weekend before this that it was down to Phoenix and Miami. Here's the trade as far as we understand it. Now, we don't know all the swaps. We don't know the years of the picks yet, I don't believe, and we don't know where Chris Paul is ultimately going to end up. Will this build into a 3-team trade? So that is a holdup here. But as of right now, Beal is going to Phoenix. Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, some second-round picks, and pick swaps are going out. The exact details, again, we do not know, but Beal obviously had to waive his no-trade clause to get him there. It is worth noting that Suns CEO Josh Bartelstein is the son of Bradley Beal's agent, Mark Bartelstein.
You can tell
a lot going on here.
Helps.
I mean, they could be cousins, but just you got to say
it's funny how blatant it is. I was not joking about you saying it. I was joking about just how ridiculous it all is, honestly, more so than anything. I don't know why Bradley Beal ever had a no-trade clause is really the bottom line.
Mark Bartelstein did a great job on that Wizards contract, is what I would say, Brendon. So let's just look at it this way. There is a lot to unpack here. We will talk about the Beal stuff, I think, through the context of what else is going on throughout the show. But here's where my mind went. Beal is another guard to play with Devin Booker, who is also like a 2 guard, as we understand that. He is an offensive first player. He is 30. This is a very all-in move. And my question, I think, to open this up is just, what does Bradley Beal, paired with Devin Booker, paired with Kevin Durant, he's the third banana, to be clear. He is the third wheel on that superstar tricycle. What does Beal look like in this offense and with those 2 guys, and what does this mean for how the offense is just going to function with those 3 all on the floor together in the starting and closing 5?
I'm not really sure if it's just happenstance. When you have Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal both wanting to go to your team, you just go ahead and do it. When you have Chris Paul 2 years before any of that, 3 years almost wanting to come to your team, you just go ahead and do it. But for some odd reason, the Suns cannot help themselves but attract players who only want to take mid-range shots. Like, just everybody they acquire is on like the upper echelon of mid-range frequency. Last year, Bradley Beal took 46% of his shots from mid. That was in the 97th percentile of all NBA players. And Booker and Durant are similarly in the top 10%, top 5% in terms of mid-range frequency. So I think that's kind of where you start. Obviously, Chris Paul's not on this team anymore, having gone out in the deal, but that's going to be the interesting part of this. I think my immediate thought is that Bradley Beal, first and foremost, is a guy who will need to get a little more comfortable behind the arc. I think he's going to be the guy, all super teams, all 3-headed monster offensive teams, somebody has to adjust the most, somebody has to alter their game the most. Maybe you call it, sacrifice. I don't know. You could still produce it at a pretty high level, but I think Beal is going to become much more of a spot-up player, secondary playmaking type of player, maybe bench. If he leads the bench unit, I think that's kind of going to be what his role is here. And he just hasn't had to do that. I mean, even when he played with John Wall, he wasn't really, a spot-up player. They kind of co-managed the offense. And so that's where my mind goes. And I think he can do it. But Beal and Booker both are guys where we know they're great shooters, but they actually don't take a lot of threes. And that's kind of the interesting part of their fit for sure.
And I think the thing with Booker is that just because Chris Paul is going out and you're going to start these 2 guys, I think it feels like we're going to see point book. That feels like kind of what is going to go on here, Brendon. It feels to me that at least in some capacity, this is now Devin Booker playing point guard. And obviously he's not going to be your traditional kind of point guard, but I think it's going to be on him in a way that is really interesting considering he is a superstar player. To me, you could argue he is the best player on the team. I think at least KD, it's KD and everything, but he's the ascending one. I think at this point, it's fair to say
offensively,
he's
he
is gonna have to acquiesce some of what makes him special, a little bit to make this work, which is a really interesting place. KD, I think, in this construction, he's gonna be malleable to this. I think he's gonna be fine. right? Like I don't suspect. Like I just kind of trust KD to morph into whatever. I do think this is going to be something of an adjustment for Booker, just because I think he's going to have to kind of be the distributor on this team in some regard. Like there's just no like he's going to play 35 minutes tonight. Beal is going to gotta play like he's got to play a ton of minutes and as well. KD's going to be that's going to ramp up in the playoffs. You're not going to have like a ton of minutes unless it's like the right perfect fit for a kind of a traditional point guard type on this roster.
Well, and they're also not going to be able to get one, is the other part of this, right? I mean, they have Cameron Payne still on this roster. He's the only guy left, really, outside of Ayton and Booker and Durant and Beal. So maybe he's a part of that solution. He's not really what you would necessarily call a traditional point guard, even himself, but maybe that's part of it. Other than that, you're looking at minimums. Can they convince Dennis Schroeder and whatnot? So even if they wanted to, I'm not sure they can. But I think that the reason that they probably feel comfortable with Booker doing that is that he's coming off of a playoff run where he pretty much did it. Even when Chris Paul was healthy in that first round and the first 2 games of the second round for Phoenix, Devin Booker was basically this team's point guard. And the way that he was able to manipulate defenses in the pick and roll, create opportunities for Ayton, for Durant, for the role players, even for Chris Paul, and the way that Booker's been able to get more efficient over time, I think all made the Suns probably feel comfortable moving forward that way. This is how Booker played early in his career, but it was ugly. They didn't win. They didn't have enough talent around him. So he's done it before. I just think he had to get to this point where he was efficient enough and able to actually make his teammates better enough that it made sense on a championship team, not on a lottery team. And it's a testament to his growth that they're able to be here. But I think you're absolutely right that that's going to be probably their kind of final incarnation when they're closing these games, because again, Payne is there, but a lot of their other incumbent free agents are wings, whether that's Torrey Craig or Josh Okogie or TJ Warren. A lot of these guys that we saw playing on the wing for them in the playoffs, they're probably going to want to retain a lot of those now that they've lost their flexibility. So that lends itself even more again to a lineup that is something like Booker, Beal, wing X, Durant, and then Ayton. That's probably what this is going to be. And not a lot of teams play that way anymore. So I don't know really if it's the best decision. It seems like a little bit of a roll of the dice, but it's going to make Booker produce at a much higher level and be thought of in a very different way if he can pull it off.
I'm very curious to see kind of what Frank Vogel and they kept Kevin Young, correct?
Yeah.
Like what they kind of design up here to kind of make all of this work. This is going to be a real interesting fit. I'm curious to see what they do with Ayton. I think obviously like the demands of him offensively are going to be, I think, a little bit lessened now. I think I'm curious to see if they do
even more lessened than they already were when he didn't want to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, and now I wonder like how aggressively are they shopping him now to turn him into 2 or 3 players?
Would you keep him and have him be a little bit more of an anchor for your defense? And if Vogel can kind of get more out of him on that end, and that's been a lot of the talk with before this Beal deal, is like, okay, maybe Ayton's actually somebody that you want to give a longer look at now that this particular coach is in place. Whereas now, even if you don't get an amazing trade, which Woj and others have said there's not a huge market, if you could even just flip him for 2 depth pieces, maybe that helps your roster feel a little more balanced and not be so reliant, so top heavy on those, big three guys.
I would be more inclined to flip him because I do think they need to find a way to be not so reliant on those top 3 guys. They are going to be over reliant on those top 3 guys. That's the structure of what this roster is now. That's unavoidable. Even if DeAndre Ayton is or is not on the roster, that doesn't impact that to me significantly, right? Like this roster is about those 3 guys now. Their health, their ability to score at an insanely efficient level, whatever that's going to look like, that's going to be what takes Phoenix wherever this is going to go. It is about those 3 guys now. It is about how those 3 coalesce. But if you wanted to build a roster that can sustain itself, and especially if you build in that KD might miss some time, that Beal might miss some time, like whatever it is, I think you're going to need depth just to manage the regular season better. Some of that can come via UDFAs and finding young guys. I think over time, the next couple of years of this, you'll need to nail some second rounders. You'll need to nail UDFAs. You'll need to nail 2-way deals and find guys in your G League. That's going to be really, really important, I think, for Phoenix, especially with this CBA. I would be more inclined, Brendan, though, to flip Ayton if I knew I could get a center back and a wing back at his price range, and if a team would give me a pick. That's kind of the three things I would really look for. I don't even need it to be a first. Could it be like a good second? Could it be like a good second? Like you need, like,
I mean,
you got to
the
replenish
trade.
the cupboards.
Sure, absolutely. I just sort of think that Ayton, maybe there's a world in which he has a really great season and he's more valuable next year. I kind of doubt that. So to me, it's like you might just have to pull the trigger on the best deal you can find this summer. The deal that a lot of Suns people have been talking about and has been out there is basically something along the lines of Terry Rozier, Cody Martin, the worse of the two, the more injured at least. We don't really know what Cody Martin is yet because he hasn't played much. And then like the 34th overall pick this year, I think is what Charlotte has. That checks your boxes outside of a center. I think in that case, you're probably looking at, can you convince like a Mason Plumlee to come to your team on a minimum and be your center? Is that good enough, or is it if that's the package?
I just don't know what Terry, like, I like Terry Rozier. What is Terry Rozier adding to your team that you don't have
Probably
already?
makes a little less sense in the Beal version of this team.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like, maybe they can't be picky. Like, it's possible they just might have to just like take whatever is served to them. Like, they're going through the lunch line in middle school on this, right? Like, they might just have to take the L. Maybe Indiana wants him after all, you know? Maybe figure that out.
TJ McConnell. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of it that's interesting, and I think kind of speaks to why the Suns might have done this, is there's just not a lot of teams that really have a Chris Paul point guard anymore, right? The way that the modern NBA functions is maybe it's not somebody exactly with the career and development trajectory that Booker had, where he kind of had his best years when he played off ball, you know, and bringing him back on. Maybe there's a version where, and there's a reality, maybe that doesn't go well, but that's really how teams play. You know, it's your guard is sort of Beal's a souped up version of this, but your guard is kind of your floor spacer, your scorer, and just a guy who can, you know, dribble and pass and make basic plays, but nothing, you know, John Stockton, Steve Nash, Chris Paul, Jason Kidd, those guys don't really exist anymore. So I see it from that standpoint. As the Suns looked past Chris Paul, it's like our team's not going to look like this anymore. It just isn't, because there's not another player like that. So how do we pivot? And bringing in another scorer and putting Booker more in that mold and having Beal be able to do a little bit of it probably does make some sense. Plus, Beal's just an awesome shooter. And so you kind of solve your problem there a little bit too, where it's like last year's roster, did they have enough shooting? Could they space the floor for those guys quite well enough? The answer a lot of the time was no. But again, when that third player is Beal instead of a ball-dominant guy like Chris Paul or with some of their other options, well, that's another box that's kind of checked. I think as long as these guys are healthy, they're going to be really good. Do you think this can be an offense that can kind of score with Denver and be among, you know, the really best offensive scoring teams come postseason time?
I think it can. I think particularly if they nail other moves and figure out some of the supplemental shooting and find pieces that fit, it can. Like, I think Booker is that good. Maybe it's just via podcasting with you and getting, you know, and I talking a lot more about basketball. Maybe it is watching just the Suns a ton in the playoffs and in the regular season, whatever it is. I'm a Devin Booker, I'm a Devin Booker true believer. I think that guy is sensational. I think that guy is like an absolute monster and is only going to get better and better and better. It's KD. Like, I think with him, you're going to just, if he's healthy, you're in great shape. And Beal as your third option is a good spot for him. He's not going to be overcast to be in a certain role. I think it is about what you find as far as depth and what you find as far as just supplemental shooting to kind of round this out. Like, I would want to bring back Jock Landale if I was them. I would be trying to keep Torrey Craig. I would be whatever bargain bin vets that want to live in Phoenix and be in that situation. I would be chasing that.